Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're using. On today's episode, I want to talk about an article I saw on LinkedIn that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. It said that starting this May, New York City employers are going to be required by law to list the minimum and maximum salary for any open position. And I thought, this is interesting. This is this goes a long way from feeling like, as a 20-year-old retail employee many years ago, that if I were to talk about my pay, I'd get fired, which at the time wasn't true because there are laws against that. But going from just kind of like, we don't talk about it, we don't mention that there's a law that says you're allowed to, but we make you feel like you are not allowed to say anything about it, to now it's becoming part of the culture is becoming that the transparency is better for employees, better for the employee experience, and therefore it is becoming mandated by law in some places. This will only get more and more like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think back to when you and I talked about this many years ago, and said, like, one way that you could approach pay is to kind of have a published menu of, like, if you have this amount of years of experience, if you've got this specific education for the role that you have, if you have skills like speaking other languages, like, basically here's the menu of how you would get paid based upon the your unique circumstances and background and experience, and kind of talking through that, because I think that there's a part of this where the transparency is super helpful in people making decisions on, is this where I want to work, and am I okay with the pay that I have? I think and we'll see what happens here, but I think that where you can run into an issue is now, well, if I can see the minimum and maximum in my offers for the minimum, I'm probably going to feel a certain way about it.
Right.
And I, so like, it's just a weird, like, I can appreciate and understand the transparency of, and I see it like on job postings now where people give a salary range and stuff like that. Like, I like that idea. I just think that if you're going to go like that far with it, like really get out there and publish it, I think you actually have to go deeper and be more specific on exactly what it is and what makes that decision, besides here's a range. Oh, and also we still make subjective decisions on what we decide is the right thing to do.
Right. Everybody thinks that they deserve whatever the high is, right? Everybody does. Like, it's human nature to think that, oh, if there's a range, then whatever that high is, that would clearly be what I would get, right? That's
or at least in the median.
Sure. I mean, hopefully you have a high sense of self-awareness where if you're not getting the maximum, but you're also, if you look at like, oh, I've been in whatever industry this is for 3 to 5 years, and I'm being offered like right in the midpoint. Hopefully you're thinking to yourself, all right, that's pretty fair. Leave some room for growth. Because I'll tell you what also doesn't feel very right too is if I'm doing the same job for 5 years and I don't get any increases because I'm at the maximum of what the job is allowed to pay, and therefore I've peaked out, or I don't get any cost of living increases, stuff like that. That just psychologically, to make the same every year, it doesn't feel as right as if you don't like, versus going up a little bit each year, even if it's not a lot. Where I think where this will have ramifications is that there will be companies who don't have a lot of redundant positions. Meaning, if you can say that, oh, we only have one person at this organization who has this role, and one person has this role, and one person has this role, then we can now say that this role has this range, and this role has this range, and this role has this range. It's harder to do that when you have 30 people that do the exact same job for an organization, and that will be where this makes inroads, is where you're doing literally the same job as the person that is in the cubicle next to you, and that's where that can change. Clearly, this is designed to eliminate gaps in pay that are the result of either conscious or unconscious biases that exist, that lead to pay gaps in terms of gender, race, a home status, whatever that is. All those things that can lead to it's hard to see in an individual situation, but in aggregate, the numbers present themselves, and you can see these gaps that exist. And this is being used to address that. I don't know that it will necessarily solve that issue, but it's at least movement in a way that that will force the workforce and the culture of work to change in a way that reacts to it. And whatever that reaction is, then more will be done or less will be done, or we'll move in a different direction. But if you are doing a job and you can truly and objectively feel like you are making less than people next to you, but yet you seem to be on par with them, or maybe in some cases better than them in terms of the number of years you've been doing it, the amount of education you have, the performance that is objectively put on paper. If you can see a comparison of performance, that does not feel good at all. And there's no way to not feel like that those differences are because of something that is out of your control and therefore completely unfair. So any time that there is transparency on a range like this, I like. But I don't know. Let me ask you this, Lorenzo. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were unfairly paid for something and you couldn't figure out why? You couldn't figure out what the reason was that you were making less than someone else for something. I want to get your answer on that. But first, I want to give it up to word from one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, have you ever felt like you were unfairly paid for something and you truly couldn't figure out what the reason was that your coworkers were making more than you?
I came from the old school where I just didn't talk about it, and I kind of felt like whatever I was given was what I should earn and what I should have. And then as I kind of continued my career in leadership, I was very grateful and thankful because I had leaders that would talk about transparency and would talk about things like pay ranges and help me to understand where I'm at and why I'm there. And so I personally never really had that beef in my career or felt that way. I have talked to many people, with people that I've worked with, people that I've known as friends in other companies around this exact subject. And the biggest underlying example that I have is when people feel like, here I am, I've been here for X amount of years, and I'm training the new person that just got hired who makes more money than I do. That tends to kind of really happen quite often, it feels. And we've actually talked about it in the show, probably in a couple of different podcasts, just around, organizations and being internally promoted, instead of being externally recruited,
right,
and how that can have that can have an impact on compensation. And so it absolutely, the dialogue exists because there tends to be real things and real examples where the answer is about, a subjective opinion, or the answer is something that has nothing to do with necessarily time and role experience or performance to a degree. So I've had many of those conversations, and I think the first step in a lot of that is just having the dialogue around what is compensation, what are ranges, what are things like merit increases, why does that happen? Let's really have a real conversation about it and realize that anytime that you have a job, there will always be people that are paid at the highest. There will always be people that will be paid at the lowest, and there will be people in the middle, unless it is everybody makes the same. And if it's an everybody makes the same type of thing, then I don't think that's the right thing either, to a degree, because that doesn't respect necessarily the unique differences or skill sets that people bring with them. So I just think that there has to be a lot of dialogue, and in some instances, correction. In some instances, I've seen that in my career where yes, there was no reason for it, or at least any reason on paper, and things have happened or decisions were made and it needed to be corrected. And in my experience, after having the dialogue, the conversations, looking at a lot of cases, many times those things are corrected, and I've appreciated that.
Yeah, I love that. If you work for an organization where that is the goal, I think that's fantastic. And I think that there are a lot of organizations who, I don't know that there necessarily is anything nefarious going on. No one's saying, oh, we're gonna keep these people making less and these people making more. But there are unconscious biases that exist. There are people who, you get hired by one hiring manager versus another, and maybe one person got hired by the hiring manager who's very by the book, and people start at the minimum, and then you move up from there. And another hiring manager is like, we'll see how I like them in the interview, and there's more subjectivity to it. And so, the existence of a difference doesn't necessarily mean that someone was intentionally trying to hurt somebody else. It can mean that, but typically what it just means is that no one was intentionally trying to make sure that harm wasn't done. And that's not the same thing as trying to hurt somebody, but it can have the same impact if there isn't transparency around these conversations. And so I think one of the benefits, if you're a leader of people and you're at an organization where the culture is that there is transparency around pay, I think it's a good thing, because at the very least what it does is it forces the conversation. Whether or not you have a good leadership team has very little to do with whether or not there's transparency around pay, and more to do with whether or not the conversations that happen when the transparency around pay happens go well. And I don't mean go well in that you get more money because you think you deserve more money. I mean go well in that you believe what you're being told, and that other people are being told the same thing around why something is the way it is, and that if there is an issue, that there's an admission of that a person can say, you know what, I never looked at it this way, but you're bringing it up in this way, and let me do some digging, let me do some research and try to figure out why this is this way. And then a week later they come back to you and say, you know what, I did look into that, and you're right, it's not. I thought this was okay, but it's not. So we're going to rectify that. The existence of a problem isn't the problem. It's the existence of a problem and an unwillingness to look into it or solve it or talk about the potential solutions. That's where the problem lies when it comes to employee engagement and productivity. So, I think as a whole, this is a positive thing, because anything that just shines light at least forces the conversation.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.